Mogi, over to you, boy.
Thank you. Yo. So, guys, there's a lot of you. When you stand up here, you realize there's a lot of people that go to this church. Good morning. My name is Morgan, and I have the privilege of sharing my testimony with you guys today. In preparation, Daryl said that I should just pretend everybody's 13 and tailor my message to a bunch of 13-year-olds, which is a lot of 13-year-olds in this church. But initially, this message was made for the youth, Jamesy and his gang, so as usual, more than welcome to go to sleep. So please forgive me. There's an occasional dudes and boys and girls that come out of this, so please forgive me. So I'm going to start with a scripture, and I'm a little bit paraphrasing at the moment, but it's Revelation 12, verse 11. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And this is my testimony. So I'm going to break it up into a few small stages of my life. I'm going to share some deeply, deeply personal things with you guys. And I hope that you see the trend of how the Lord pursues us. Not just me, but you, through every little thing that you go through. So right now, as we sit here, there's a few wars going on. There's a few big wars in countries. There's wars for land. There's all sorts of wars for oil. But right now, there's a few silent wars that we all fight in our head. Nobody ever sees. Nobody ever really knows. But I guarantee you there's a few people sitting here with a silent war in their head. My first little war started before conception. Here you go, Mom. My mother, when she was young, she still is young, at least by heart, she lived in a small little flat in Yeovil. Now, I don't know if you guys know about Yeovil in those days, but apparently it was the bomb. She did her thing. She had very little to no support. She was all by herself, doing her thing, working. Don't look at me, Mom. Working and just going through her life. But one day, but my mother was always a level of fight. My mother to this day is one of the strongest people I've ever met. And she's tough as nails. She weighs about 40 kgs, but she'll take you out. Not for coffee. So a little bit before, so she's a fighter. So my mother was 35 years old, living her life in Yeovil, doing her thing, going to work, going back. She met a man, and she fell pregnant. But my mother didn't know she was pregnant. She carried on with her life. My mother's always been small like me. Sometimes small, sometimes big like me. But she didn't know she was pregnant. I wasn't sure if my mother knew God in those days. And I'm unsure to what degree. Whether or not Mom knew God as a father or just knew as the man upstairs. Like I said, my mother went on with her life, not knowing she was pregnant. Goes into it, and we picks up weight. My mother's small, so you pick up weight, you see it, thinks nothing of it. 6 months into this pregnancy, my mother finds out that she's pregnant. Now think of this. My mother had very little. She didn't have lots. She was working long hours. And now she's pregnant with 3 months to prepare. Thankfully, I had 3 days to prepare for this, Daryl. But my mother had 3 months to prepare for a baby boy. My mother could have done many things. But she chose to keep me. She chose life over circumstance. And she chose to keep me. I could only imagine the thoughts that went through my mother's head. But on the 20th of July, 1991, I was born in the Joburg Gen. Apparently it was like Yeovil, it was lekker. Side story here is there was another one in the womb with me. It wasn't just me. There was a little boy or little girl in the womb with me. Unfortunately, didn't make it. And I was the only one born. I'd like to pause here for a few moments. Give you something to think about. How many of you are going through something very similar, where the odds are stacked severely against you? You've got to choose life, you get to choose death. You have many choices. How can you support someone? There may be a little girl in your life that is pregnant, and you have the opportunity to support them and make this little war in their head a little bit better. So I was born into some chaotic things. Not that I remember much, but I remember we lived in a very small flat. And I do remember every time I looked up, there was Mom. My mom had hectic working hours. She had zero help from her mom. She had zero help from anybody around her. It was just my mom, and in Benoni, as they say, on her ace. I knew my mother was working, and she had to go and do what she needs to do for work. But every time I looked up, she was there. My mother was completely involved in my life from day one. It's a choice that she made to be completely involved. Always remember that. About a year into my life, she met a man. He's got a difficult name, so I'm going to call him Tony. It's applicable because he's a Portuguese guy. He's like 500, yeah, but he was a Portuguese guy. He was a Christian. They got together, and we moved in with him. On face value, Tony seemed okay. He was a Christian, had his own business. He was in great physical shape. I think he did comrades, I don't know how many times. The sake was lean and mean, just like me. Well, on face value, he looked good. We ended up moving into a double-story house in Roberts Avenue in Kensington. Now, you must understand, we come from a 2-bedroom flat in Yeovil. Double-story house in Roberts Avenue was a massive, massive jump. Tony ended up being a relentlessly violent man. My first memories of this guy were graphic, and I'll spare you the details, but it wasn't a loving father. It was a relentlessly violent man that abused women. Many a times the cycle would call the police. Police would appear, nothing would happen, or something would happen. But somehow he always made church on Sunday. But Sunday he would come home, and so the cycle started again. But all I remember, I don't remember much, I was quite small, but I remember snippets of his violent ways. And that today lives rent-free in this head. My mother was planning to leave him, but somehow she fell pregnant with my sister. It made our exit a little bit more difficult. Tony and my mom decided to work on things for the sake of my sister. And my sister was born on the 29th of November, 1993. I was elated. I had a sister. I think there's a picture of my sister. Was it too early? Yeah, there she is. I had hair. Once upon a time, there was a lot of hair. I remember little things of my sister when I was small. And I remember telling my mom, "Mom, you need to take Kels back to the hospital because she just cries and cries and cries." My sister is still a very vocal, noisy lady to this day. Needless to say, Tony's violence and abuse did not stop. In fact, it escalated and escalated to new heights. My mother knew that we had to move on, and she had a plan. We were going to go to Cape Town. My mother had a job lined up. Everything was cool. Got onto a bus or a train, I'm not quite sure. All I remember is there was a lovely old lady sitting behind us that my sister and I kept getting sweets from. Beautiful Tani, I wish I knew where she was today. So my mother had a plan. So we got onto the bus and off we went to Cape Town. And Cape Town was an interesting time. We ended up moving in with my aunt and her husband. And these oaks were hooligans. They just fought and fought and fought. It was just chaos. Every time we got there was chaos. But we needed a place to stay. My mother's job ended up falling through. It's not like now where you get an emailed letter of offer. People told you, "Hey, there's a job, come get it," and off you go. And sometimes they lied. In this situation, they lied. My mother committed to staying with my aunt and uncle. A few months into this, my aunt and uncle got divorced. I was 2 or 3 years old. Somehow I saw the writing on the wall. And my mother and I and Kaylee had to get out. I think of this. It's a mom, got no job, got nothing, living in a strange town. There's no Benoni ponies to quickly phone and say, "Hey, bud, you got a job for me?" It's none of that. You're in a town all by yourself with two kids. So we ended up going into this little shelter situation in Cape Town. In truth, it was a jolt for me. I loved it. I remember a few little snippets of it, and I remember always having kids to play with and toys and all these random things, and it was actually a blast. obviously for my mom, this got a little bit lame. And we eventually had to come up to Joburg. This all happened within the first 5 years of my life. But somehow I was fine. Like I say, and I keep saying it, every time I looked up, my mother was there. And I had a sister this time that I loved to bits. Moving back up, we moved in with Tony. In a 2-bedroom flat in Troyville. Now, Troyville was always dodge. It was never proper. Even to this day, it's dodge. It's like a bunch of Rottweilers. Look them in the eye and they'll bite you. But yeah, Troyville was a bit touch and go. I went to preschool. I went to Lollipop Land. This is the bomb. And my sister went to Rainbow, I think. Tony was okay on face value. As we got there, he seemed like he had his things together, and we were okay. The only thing I noticed this time around was he had a bit of a habitual thing with the red wine. There was a big papsak on the fridge. I'll never forget that. But this seemed to calm him down, and things weren't too bad. But every now and then, he'd have one or too many glasses of wine. And his violence escalated to something even worse than before. We functioned in this dysfunction for many years. Tony started getting spiteful. He started not giving my mom and I food. He'd give Kaylee food, but it really wasn't food. It was scraps of whatever he was eating. My mother would give me Pro Nutro. I don't know why, but there was always Pro Nutro in our house. Banana flavored. To this day, I remember it. But I never, ever, ever saw my mother eat. To this day, I can't think of a time in that time, where she sat down and had a meal with us. I just simply think there was none. Eventually, this got quite out of control, obviously, and it kept escalating and escalating. And between the two of them, they decided this is not working. My mother and my sister and I needed to get out. So we moved into a place in Kensington again. It was basically a room with a bathroom, a kitchen, and some sunroom situation that was a part of somebody's office. So somebody had one half of the office, and we lived in the other half as like a little family. It seemed a little stable, and I felt fine. We're going to call this house Blenheim Street. Next door to Blenheim Street was another child named Daniel. Daniel was in grade 6. I was in grade 3. Daniel had everything. He had lots of money. He had the coolest toys. Mom and Dad were divorced, but they seemed to have it all together. He had tons of cool toys. Daniel's dad wasn't around. He wasn't too involved in Daniel's life. But Daniel's idea of what a normal family was like was somewhat warped. I loved Daniel's toys. I didn't have many. So I looked at Daniel's toys, and I knew I wanted those toys. Daniel also knew this. And he knew that I would do anything for those toys. So he decided to molest me with the carrot of the toys. I didn't quite understand what was going on at that point. At that point, all I knew was I got to go home with a toy every day. This happened in grade 3. I became quite withdrawn. I wasn't talking to anyone. I became quite angry and a bit of a problem at school. When I went to school, I was a problem. And at home, I had outbursts where my temper just got out of control. Imagine a 9-year-old. I can't. So the school made me see a psychologist. Her name was Sally. How I remember this lady's name, I don't know. And Sally would talk to me about why I'm withdrawn, why I'm so angry, why I'm going through the things I'm going through. And I didn't know. I just kept quiet. I kind of knew. I just kept quiet. And they blamed it on the chaos at home. And I'm sure my mother got a lot of flack for our home life. Later on that year, my mother met a guy, Uncle Chris. You see him sometimes? He walks up and down here with his walking stick. They started dating and would visit my mom on weekends and during the night. Uncle Chris used to drive a 1400 Bakkie, and he'd park outside and visit my mom on the pavement. And Kaylee and I, we used to run and have little peep-throughs through the bricks to see if they're kissing. It was a bit awkward to see my mother kissing, but anyway. Uncle Chris came into our life, and him and I had a bit of a power struggle. I wasn't too keen on this man coming into my life. I was the man of the house at 9 years old. How dare you enter my life? And I also had a severe distrust in men. I didn't know what this guy's agenda was, and so my guard was up. My mother and Uncle Chris met at work, and that's how they kind of got their romance going on, at work in the stairs, smoking. My mother, much like me, she has a bit of a fuse. And the one day, she blew a fuse with her boss, and she quit her job. My mother walked out, and off she went. I can only imagine on the way home what she was thinking. I've got 2 kids to feed. What on earth am I going to do? Uncle Chris obviously heard this, and a couple of hours later, he appeared at our home. And they obviously had a conversation, blah, 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 kiss, whatever. And they sorted that out. A week or 2 later, my timeline may be out, but it seemed very quick, Mom. A week or 2 later, we moved in with Uncle Chris. This ending my molestation arrangement with Daniel. We moved in the November. Uncle Chris is and always will be a strange dude. And I ended up getting around with Uncle Chris, and I ended up getting an older brother named Ashley that I adored. I don't remember much with that initial move with Uncle Chris. There's a few things about Uncle Chris that I remember from that day. And I remember he was super frugal. We had a saying in the house, don't buy it unless it's on special. To this day, Uncle Chris says that. Uncle Chris never spoiled us, and we never encountered any massive lack. Somehow he was there. My first big memory of that initial move with Uncle Chris was Christmas Day, my very first Christmas Day. And I'm not going to look at my family because I don't think I'm going to hold it together. I remember waking up early because we knew Father Christmas came. Now there's a small side story here. My sister and I knew this Father Christmas situation was going to arrive. We didn't know who he was or whatever. And I got a BB gun somewhere. So we hid in the cupboard. Uncle Chris came to check on us, whether or not we're sleeping. And I shot him. It was a funny story. But we knew Father Christmas arrived. He was in the shape of Uncle Chris. I think he still is. But that initial Christmas was something special. We woke up super early, ran to the lounge, and we waited for my mom and Uncle Chris to wake up. Sure, there were a lot of presents. I remember standing at that tree looking at all these presents. So they said, get your presents. So Kaylee and I walked in, walked up there, took the first one we saw with our names on, and we sat down and we opened it. And we were ecstatic. I think Kaylee got a doll. She always got dolls. And I got a little boat jet ski that ran on batteries that would do circles in the pool. And that was it. We sat down, walked away. And my Uncle Chris and my mom said, hey, they're all for you. There's more there. It's not just one thing. There's more. There's so much here. I think of that Christmas tree story and my life with the Lord. He offers us everything. Yet we walked away with one little present, thinking we undeserve it. We just need one little present. Sometimes we don't hear him say, like Uncle Chris and my mother, hey, they're all for you. And we walk away. But actually, he wants us to have it all. I ended up failing grade 3 that year and had to move to another school. My sister failed grade 1, and we ended up going to Germiston South School. My sister excelled there. She was an operator. She smashed it in sport and academics. I think she even became head girl in primary school. What a ledge. But to me, it was a joke. I wasn't too keen on primary school. I'd get into fights. I'd bully kids with my words because I was always this big. I knew I'd get clapped. Time with Uncle Chris was probably the most stable time that I can remember. My mother and Uncle Chris would have normal fights, but it was nothing compared to what it was before. This is kind of where my story gets over that hump and things start changing. When I turned 13, my friend Carlos invited me to a youth group with him. I wasn't really allowed to go to youth. I think the youth cutoff was 14. So I lied. I mean, it's youth, it's church. I can lie. It's like a credit card. Sin now and pay tomorrow. And off I went to youth. This youth was a very poor youth. But I walked in there and I sensed there was something in me that the Lord was tugging to. My reference to church was there. My mother occasionally would take us to Sunday school at the Methodist church. But this youth was a little bit different. They encouraged us to have honest prayer and conversations with the Lord. And I loved going to youth. I remember how this youth was set up. We would go in, we'd say how's it to everybody. You'd walk in, we'd get together in a circle, and there was this smell that I'll never forget. The smell of paraffin and shoes. That smell of paraffin in shoes was because all the children there stayed in an informal settlement down the road called Digatole. And that's how they cooked, that's how they kept themselves warm. Shoes were never washed. There also wasn't really socks to wear with those shoes. So you can imagine the smell. So we'd sit there, stand there in a circle, and we'd clap and we'd sing, "We want to see Jesus lifted high." At 13 years old, there was a bunch of kids. My sister even came occasionally. They would have a small little thing where we sing, "We want to see just Jesus lifted high," with no CDs, just an a cappella group of guys and women singing. And these are things that I remember to this day. So it would be a small praise and worship thing. Then we would get together, have a short message, not like this long drawn out thing that we're going through now. And we would talk about the things of the Lord. And then we would play soccer with a tennis ball. Because if you're 13, 14 years old, why would you play soccer with a soccer ball? I went to youth for the girls. More often than not. And I liked girls a lot. But there was something in me that said, maybe you're gay. Maybe you're gay. So I didn't entertain those things. They would chat about this whole born again thing, which appealed to me because my identity was a mess. I was not sure if I was straight or gay. Going to youth didn't mean my behavior changed. I was still a little rubbish. I was still fighting and playing games. Uncle Chris and I had huge power struggles. Still wanted to be the man of the house. And it was a weird cycle because Uncle Chris would discipline me as a father should. I would not take that discipline. We would fight. My mother would get involved to protect me. Then they would fight. And then there was this whole big blow up because Morgan can't behave. And the cycle would repeat and repeat and repeat. I ended up scraping through grade 7. I was even a scholar patrol, which was great because that meant I got to leave early. But what I didn't know was then I only could leave the scholar patrol duty at 1:30 anyway. So it was a bit of a stuffer. But I scraped through and I started school at Germiston High. I loved Germiston High. To this day, it's a place that I love. However, I was still a little bugger. But the school allowed me to do sports that I was good at. They allowed me to swim, play soccer, and row. Which was great because they had this stupid demerit system that you'd get minus points for being naughty, but you'd get positive points for doing sport. So I could carry on like a hooligan as long as I swam fast and played soccer. That didn't matter. It was a perfect arrangement that I had with everybody. In grade 9, I met a girl. She liked me a lot more than I liked her. But I thought I was gay, so this was kind of par for course anyway. Yeah, she was a bit strange. She was a Roman Catholic. I didn't know much about said religion. But I knew they were Christians, so we dated. Because that was super important to me, that I dated a Christian girl. Why? Who knows? But it was super important for me. She would go to a home cell every Wednesday. And I thought she was cheating on me. Kind of hoped it because I loved drama. I was so addicted to the drama. I thought, I'll catch her. And this would be a cool story. I was addicted to drama. But she decided to call my bluff. And I said, you're seeing other boys. So she said, no, just come. So she gave me the address. And off I went. Uncle Chris did take me. He was taxi for many, many years. He'd make us pay petrol, though. I walked into that home cell, and man, oh man, something was different. These people worshipped the Lord, like Jesus was standing next to them. And there was a CD player, blaring Jesus culture. But there was something tangible there. Whoopsie. There was something tangible there that I could feel. I was a bit dismayed that she wasn't seeing other boys, but it is what it is. Sitting in that life group, home cell, as we call it life group. Yeah, there it was called a home cell. Sitting there, I met a man and his wife, Corin and Vincent Weber. You'll see them every now and then at church. But these people, sorry, this is going to fly away. These people were something special. They looked me in the eye and they saw something in me that I didn't quite see in myself. Wow. And they decided to walk a road with me. Wow. Their son, Darren, sits there somewhere. Him and I also became friends. And we ended up doing very naughty things together. But we were Christians, so, grace covers it all. We were naughty little buggers together, and we ended up becoming good friends. So one day at Life Group, home cell, Vincent and Corin led me to the Lord at the tender age of 15 years old. The week before this, I was teasing a child. His name was Carl. I'll never forget this kid as long as I'm alive. Carl went through very similar stories to me, but I was a little bit stronger, so I picked on him because I knew exactly where to get him. So he had a problem with his birthday. Carl hated his birthday. One day we convinced the form room teacher that it's Carl's birthday. So she put him on a chair and the whole class sang happy birthday to him. Picked up a cricket bat and he went after the teacher. Hurt people, hurt people. Always remember that. Long story short, he was suicidal. The whole situation went really pear-shaped. But the Lord's favor was on me. I should have been suspended that day. But that night, I gave my life to the Lord. During this time, Vincent and Corin walked a long road with me. They showed me through their life who Jesus is. At school, I did very well in sport. Vincent and Corin would sometimes personally come and watch me swim, watch me race, and watch me play games. And they helped me through a ton of forgiveness, not only towards my biological dad, but to Tony. Tony was a huge point in my life, a huge person that I had to forgive. Me giving my life over to the Lord didn't mean the nonsense at school went away, but gradually I started changing. I ended up getting colors for swimming and becoming head boy. The day they announced me as head boy, the whole school went, ah. And they clapped because they knew my story and they knew what the Lord has done in my heart. I was still working on this whole thing. Let's go back. So being head boy meant that I had to give devotions every morning. And that was cool being newly saved. So every morning I'd stand in front of the school and tell them that if they don't know Jesus, they're going to hell. That worked out very well. But they knew me, they knew where I was coming from, and they knew the redeeming story that the Lord did in my heart. I was working on the thought of not being gay and that whole situation. However, my attraction to my girlfriend didn't quite change. We fought and broke up many, many times in high school. But her and I stayed together. I call this a situationship because we weren't really in a relationship, but we just kind of carried on. The one day, Vincent and Corin's son, Darren, met a girl. I was friends with him. We were very good friends. But I liked his girlfriend. I laid eyes on her, and I knew that this is the one. She didn't know that yet, but I knew. She didn't have a car, and Darren asked if I could please give her a lift to church every Sunday and to counseling school every Monday. So I was like, but got to do what I've got to do. The more I took her around, the more I started praying. And started praying and started praying. And my prayer was, Lord, if it's your will, that's the woman I want to marry. Problem is, I was in a relationship and the Lord convicted me proper about wasting this lady's time. So I broke up with her, took her to the McDonald's, because, 18 years old, you've got $15. McDonald's is the way. I bought her a hot chocolate and I broke up with her. She took it very well. My car didn't, though. I ended up getting a hot chocolate thrown at me. And in those days, I took my cars very seriously. It was heartbreaking for her. No, I'm joking. It was terrible. But I knew I wasn't being fair to her. And Vincent challenged me on dating with intent. And not dating because it's the thing to do. So I was free, doing my thing. Darren was still dating his girlfriend. And I was praying. And then they broke up. And I was so sad for her. I thought, oh, you poor girl. So I offered this lovely shoulder to cry on. And I counseled her through that. And I said, don't worry, you'll find better. Somehow I knew she'll be okay. I kept on praying for 2 years after this happened, dropping this lady off every single day, every single Sunday, every single Monday, and praying, Lord, if it's your will, I want to marry that girl. 2 years into it, she agreed to date me. No, 2 years into this prayer, she said, you potential. I was like, fantastic. Thank you, Jesus, I'm potential. Held on to potential for a few months, and then eventually she agreed to date me, and she told me she loved me. Quite interesting. Darren's birthday, she told me she loved me. Wow. So it was bittersweet for Darren, sorry, but today her name is Lizelle Brown, and we've been married for 9 years. And that's her. So that's Vincent, who eventually married us. And the crazy restoration process is Darren was my best man at that wedding. And doing dating and doing things the way the Lord wants you to do it means that you can be like Darren and have freedom standing next to your mate, because you know you've treated a woman with integrity throughout. And I honor you for that, Darren. So there's a few things that we learn out of this whole thing. These are a few snippets. I've left out a few details. But the Lord came through for me in many, many ways. And there's top 3 things that the Lord did in my heart. So the whole no dad thing, the Lord has been unbelievably kind to me. I had a dad with me all the time. There was always a man around me teaching me the things that I needed to, exactly when I needed to learn them. Think of standing up and peeing, gents. Who taught you that? I can't tell you, but someone did. And there was someone in my life that taught me how to stand up and pee. I think of a few things. I think of Uncle Chris coming into our lives, giving us a stable home, a stable environment, making sure I had clothes and shoes and food. He carted us around during our teenage time. And I think of how the Lord used Uncle Chris in a massive way. The spiritual aspects of my life with Vince. He taught me some big things with the Lord. He challenged me to date with intent. I didn't date with intent. I dated because everyone else was doing it. And sometimes the best dads are the ones you call mom. And I think of that time before Uncle Chris, before Vince, before anybody, where there was just mom. And I looked up, she was always there. There was also the whole Daniel thing. So identity was a big stuff up for me. For a long time, I walked around thinking I must be gay. And this is a strange little story. So I've always been small and skinny. And every time I'd get sick, I'd get quite sick because I had asthma. So I'd get sick and it was catastrophic. What kept me on the straight and narrow with no other goals was the fact that I thought I might have AIDS. And I'm probably going to die anyway. And that's the things I walked around with at school. Being small, being sick on things. I thought I was going to die anyway. So I did what I needed to do. But I overcame those things through strong people in my life who showed me my identity through Jesus. Not who I think I am, not the labels people put on me, but who Jesus says I am. The road was long, but having someone next to you makes it a lot more bearable. The third and probably the most important thing that I learned out of all of this was forgiveness. And this road was even longer than all the others. Forgiving meant that I had to go through each aspect of my life and forgive them properly. I had to forgive Tony. I had to forgive Tony and empathize from where he came from. He came from a deeply troubled childhood, covered in violence. And again, hurt people hurt people. I didn't forgive him once. I forgave him millions of times. And even going through this, I forgave him another 1,000 times. And this wasn't easy to go through, trust me. The massive part I also had to forgive was Daniel. And Daniel was a big one. Because that little thing gave me a stamp over my life. That you're gay, that your identity is messed up, and that you're broken. But I forgave him, and I set him free from my heart. That's an important aspect of forgiveness, setting him free from your heart. Holding no grudge. Does it mean you have to have that person in your life? Nope. There's people in here that we've chosen to keep out of our lives. But it doesn't mean I don't forgive them. I forgive them. I just choose to not have them in my life. The biggest person I had to forgive was me. And it may come as a shock as you're sitting here. You're like, it wasn't your fault, blah, blah, blah. But to me, that molestation thing for a long time seemed transactional. It seemed that I was doing something and getting something in return. I think of the times where Tony was around with my mother and fighting and hitting. I should have stood up for her. I should have got in the way and given him a smack. These are the things that I had to forgive myself for. But these were all thoughts that the enemy put in my head. The truth is, I didn't know better. The truth is, I was too young. And the truth is that the Lord was working in me. That there was detail around it, but the Lord was speaking to me. I have a theory. God good, devil bad. It's a simple theory. And I say it a lot. But God is good. It didn't mean He wanted me to go through these things. That's the enemy. But God is good. And He turns things for His good. So guys, throughout my life, I can just see how the Lord protected and kept me safe. I think of the womb. I think of that 50% chance of it could have been me that was miscarried. But I'm here. I think of that whole Daniel situation. And I think of Tony. And I think of all those things that could have gone severely wrong. Somehow, His hand was over me. But throughout it all, there was a mom. Throughout it all, there was a Carlos inviting this laddie to youth. Throughout it all, there was an Uncle Chris. Throughout it all, there was a Vincent. There was a Karen. There was a Kaylee. There was a Lizelle. And Darren. The Lord used these people in critical points in my life. I wonder if you could pause on that. Think about your life. Think about someone here, someone in your heart, somewhere along the line that you could maybe walk a road with. Some confused little guy. Maybe Jamesy, it means you have to be a Carlos, but and invite that mate to school, to youth. Lekker, I'm glad you sat there. Maybe it's just a kid on the street that you can give a home. In closing of my message, I would like to draw you guys back to my sister and I's first Christmas with Uncle Chris and my mother. We walked away with one present, but my parents called us back. Think of your life. What's under that tree? This is not a Christmas message. It's a small metaphor of what's under that tree. Maybe it's freedom. Maybe it's forgiveness. Maybe it's healing. Or perhaps someone sitting here is trusting the Lord for the ultimate gift of salvation. And you, the person next to them, that just needs to say, are you sure you know where you're going? And that's the thought I want to leave you with. But before I close, I want to thank my mom, Kaylee, Uncle Chris, Lizelle, the Foxes, and everybody that allowed me to share this message with you. There were a lot of people that could have got very hurt in this, but they allowed me to speak to you and have this conversation. Thank you.